Hi BookTube! My name is the Book Mage, welcome back to my channel. Yes, I am in kitty pyjamas, start the year as you mean to go on. So yep, 2020, finally over, glad we can leave that hellscape behind. Not that I think the new year is going to be much better, but one can hope. So yeah, this is my yearly wrap-up, year-in review type video. So in this video I will be giving you a list of every book I read this year with like a rating alongside it, in the order that I read them. And then I decided not to do like the sort of top 10 style videos I was doing last year because, spoilers, I've only read 21 books this year. So that's not like a bad amount by any means, but it's not really enough for me to do like top 10 videos because it's just not enough books. So I thought what I would do is instead I would do like a personalised like book awards type video where I just go through some of the like best and worst books of like certain categories that I've just picked. And so yeah, that's basically what this video will be. So if you want to see like my, I guess, best and worst of the year as well as like some other kind of fun categories maybe, then stay tuned. But first of all, I'm going to give you the list of every single book I read this year in order, though I will take down my kitty hood first so I can actually hear myself. And so yeah, in the order that I read them, here are all 21 books that I read in 2020. Red Sister by Mark Lawrence, 3.5 stars. Grey Sister, 3.75 stars. Bound, 2.5 stars. And Holy Sister, also by Mark Lawrence, 3.75 stars. Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, 3 stars. Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, 2 stars. The Bone Houses by Emily Lloyd-Jones, 3.5 stars. This Is How You Lose the Time War by Max Gladstone and Emil El-Mohtar, 3 stars. Motherfucking Wizards by Leonard Delaney, 2 stars. The Wolf by Leo Carew, 4.5 stars. Lock Every Door by Riley Sager, 2.5 stars. The Monster of Elendhaven by Jennifer Giesbrecht, 3.5 stars. The Fate of the Fallen by Kel Cade, 1.5 stars. The Shadow Saint by Gareth Hanrahan, 4 stars. Prosper's Demon by KJ Parker, 3 stars. Binti by Nnedi Okorafor, 3 stars. All Systems Red by Martha Wells, 4 stars. The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins, 3.5 stars. Catching Fire, 3 stars. And Mockingjay by Suzanne Collins, 3 stars. And lastly, The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang, 3 stars. So I know that 21 books is not a lot for some people, and compared to what I read last year, it's like, I think it's less than half of what I read last year. And I had set my goal at the start of the year to 75 books. So, to be fair though, I was not anticipating a global pandemic. I'm not displeased with the amount of books that I've read. I'm saying that though, 17 of those books were read by the end of February. I just only read 4 books in like the last 10 months of the year. But I still think like, it's not bad at all. It's definitely like a decent amount for like a person to read in a year, and I'm not displeased with the amount of books that I've read this year. I've read some really, really good books, I read some bad books, and we're going to get onto that in a sec. So I know several other people across BookTube do like their book awards, or different people do different variations of this type of like book award. And I do read primarily fantasy, so I'm not going to have like different genres or anything really listed here. And because of the small number of books that I've read, I only have like a few smaller categories. But I think this is something that I might continue doing next year if I get back into the swing of reading, and there will be like newer categories, I guess, for next year. So yeah, I might make this like a fun yearly part of my end of year wrap up. So with that said, I have like 9 little categories that I want to like give book awards for, and that does include things like my best and worst of the year. So yeah, we're gonna kick that off now. So my first award is for Most Original Fantasy. And so I kind of wanted to give this award to the book that just stood out from all the rest of the fantasy that I've read this year, or just in general. It probably doesn't come as too much of a surprise to know that the book that I have decided is the most original fantasy that I have read this year is The Shadow Saint by Gareth Hanrahan. I have talked about this book before, but it is the second book in a series, so I can't really delve into too much detail without giving spoilers. What I will say is this is primarily set in a single city, and it's a very weird, dark D&D / Lovecraftian feeling city. The entire plot of this book is very bound in like the theological aspects of this fictional world. So this book already starts out with a very original setting, but what set this book apart as being incredibly unique for a fantasy, even aside from like the environment, was just the fact that this is the most political fantasy I've ever read. Normally when somebody says political fantasy, you think of like scheming for the throne and like underhanded dealings and like alliances between nobility. This is more like modern day politics. This is an election, a fantastical election in this fictional city, and there are people actually trying to get into office, there are people canvassing and like hunting for votes, there are there's so much going on, and it's all about this election, and there's a lot going on in the background. There are a lot of other characters that are like on the sort of sidelines and that maybe don't have stuff to do with the election itself, but a massive part of the story follows characters involved with and like circling around this fantasy election. And it's not like the core part of the premise. I've never read anything else like it. I really haven't, for obvious reasons. This is definitely the most original fantasy that I have read this year. So the second award on my list is for Best Concept, and I feel like this is pretty broad, like pretty open, generic, but I kind of like that because it means that in future years I can just sort of play this how I want to. And so of the books I read this year, the one I think had the best concept was This Is How You Lose the Time War by Max Gladstone and Amel El-Mattar. Basically, the sort of core concept here is that there are two possible futures that both technically exist at the same time, and these two futures obviously want to make sure that their reality is the one that will come into existence, so they both send agents back down the threads of time to alter little things throughout the past to sort of ensure that their reality is the one that wins out and ends up existing. And it might seem a little paradoxical, and it is, but at the core of it, it follows these two characters, Red and Blue. It's more this sort of epistolary love story told over time, a lot of time. They sort of start writing letters back and forth, and it starts as sort of like goading each other, but then it gets into this sort of thing where you feel like maybe they're the only two people who really understand each other and can really ever connect with each other. And they keep meeting at all these various points through time. Through these letters, they keep sort of like leaving like little trails for each other, and it's very original. The writing was very interesting, and it's just the way that you get to see this relationship develop and change over time. And I feel like as a concept for a book, out of all the books I read this year, I feel like that was the best, or at least most interesting concept of all the books I read this year. It was very original and different. And if you haven't given this book a go, it is very short, so I would recommend it. Okay, now we get on to some shallow opinions. Yeah, my third award is for the ugliest cover. Of all the books I read this year, this one had the ugliest cover. I'm so sorry to say. Once again, it's The Shadow Saint by Gareth Hanrahan. It's atrocious. And I'm sorry, I understand what the cover was going for, but I am just very sad because book one looks like this, and it's beautiful, and I can see the characters, the colour, the artwork. This looks like someone got into Photoshop and there are too many filters. And I understand that there is meant to be some, without spoiling anything, there is meant to be some sort of like unknowable, weird, unfathomable architecture in this book. And I assume that that's what it's like meant to show. But I still hate it. I still hate this cover. I don't like how like the yellow looks against the black. I don't like this. I just don't like it. It's just personal taste. I loved this book, but I hate this cover. So yeah, sadly, fantastic book, really original. I just don't like the cover. So next is the best covers of the books that I've read this year. So not just any book that I hauled, not just any book from 2020, but specifically books that I read this year, regardless of when they came out. And this one was actually really hot, because ugly book covers, there were a lot, but good book covers, I don't think I read that many books with really pretty covers this year. I just don't. The one that I've decided to go with, mainly because of my magpie nature, is this 10th anniversary paperback edition of Catching Fire by Suzanne Collins. It is mainly because like it's shiny. I do really like this cover. I like that they look like emblems from the actual world. And I really love this sort of like blue and like dark and like this sort of like, is it like puce or fuchsia sort of like colour scheme? I really like this. While I'm not that fond of like the weird close-up photo of like this plant that's on here, the symbol being this beautiful shiny blue colour, I'm very fond of. And so that's kind of the main reason that I think this is the prettiest book I've read this year. Okay, the next award is for the book that I'm most likely to recommend. So of all the books I read this year, which one that I am most likely to go out to people and say, you should read this? And this one's very easy because I have recommended this book to like so many people this year. And that is All Systems Red by Martha Wells. Did you not see this coming? I feel like this is such a fantastic book to recommend because it's very short. It's a sci-fi, but it's extremely accessible because it's very character-based and story-driven, and there's not a lot in here about like a really complicated plot or various like big sci-fi terms or themes that you like really need to get your head around. It's very, very simple, it's very fun, it's kind of tongue-in-cheek. The main character, Murderbot, they are like this sentient sec unit, so they're not quite human, but they're not fully robot. I think they might be an android, but I'm not wholly sure. The sec unit is, it calls itself Murderbot, which I love and respect right off the bat. And it's helping this group of scientists as they study like this remote planet. They're either like geographical or geological surveys or something like that. But Murderbot doesn't really care much. It's very good at its job, but they don't care very much about the actual people around them. They're much more into watching things like bad TV and telenovelas and that sort of thing in their own like private little pod. They would just rather do nothing all day but just watch bad TV. And again, like, I can relate to that. I appreciate this. And anytime Murderbot gets into like a social situation where they have to like interact with one of the crew, it does not go well. It's things like just not knowing what to do, not knowing what to say, just wanting to go and stand and face in the corner and pretend that the world around you doesn't exist. And again, it's highly relatable. It's very funny. I really love the character of Murderbot. Like, it's not just amusing, like I have genuine like emotional attachment to this brilliant murderous sec unit. I love them so much. So yeah, I recommended this book to so many people because it's short, it's accessible, it's funny. So yeah, this is definitely the most, of all the books I read this year, this is definitely the easiest to recommend. Okay, next is my award for the most meh book of the year. The book that when I think back on it, I just think, meh. And that book is Lock Every Door by Riley Sager. This, I did make a mistake because thrillers are not really my thing. Yeah, this wasn't an atrocious book. I did pick it up because of like booktube hype, and I wanted to know what happened and like how it ended, because I'd heard the premise about this girl who is kind of down on her luck. She has like no family, she has like one friend, no boyfriend, no job, no house. She's like sleeping on her friend's sofa, and she gets this opportunity to be paid to apartment sit in this very famous building called the Bartholomew, and obviously she takes up the offer, but while she's staying in this room, like just staying there, getting paid to just be in an apartment, a really nice apartment, weird things start to happen. She starts to like look into like the sordid past of this very famous hotel, and yeah, there's just like a creepy vibe while she's living there, and you don't really know if something really sinister is going on. There's a lot of like, there's too many things that going on that it's like, this is not a coincidence. So for a setup, I was interested to know like what the payoff was. I'm not going to say what it was, I just didn't, it just wasn't good. But I don't feel like the book was bad. I feel like it's the kind of thing that you could buy in like a train station or an airport to keep you like entertained while you're on a long journey, because I feel like it requires like no brain power to get into it. It's very like accessible, easygoing. It isn't boring to read or anything. There's enough of a pace to the story there to like keep you moving through it. So yeah, this is just one of those books where it's like, I just don't really have any strong feelings about it either way. But unlike some other, what did I rate this? It was like a 2 stars or something, I think. Either way, it just wasn't memorable. It wasn't bad enough for me to be able to like rant about it, because there wasn't really anything wrong with it. It just wasn't to my taste, and it didn't really entertain me, and it didn't really shock me, and I wasn't really surprised by any of the tropes in there, because they're tropes. I could see them coming a mile away. And it was just meh. It just wasn't really anything. I'm just like, I just don't care. Okay, the next book in my like little awards is this year's best newest release. So of all the books that came out in 2020, that I read in 2020, which one was my favourite? And again, I feel like I'm just talking about the same books, but again, this one, it just is Shadow Saint by Kara Tan Rahan. Once again, the book was fantastic. I feel like of all the books that came out this year, this was definitely the best one that I read. I was so hyped for this coming out. I somehow got an early copy of it. I don't know how. I think they just sent it out from the shop early, so I got to read this like right after it released, and I just had a really great time reading it. It was such a fantastic sequel, such a fantastic continuation to the story. It wasn't quite my best book of the year, because there were some other good ones in here. However, If I had only been basing this on like just the books in 2020, this one had to be the best. Okay, my next little best award thing is for series finale, so the best series finale that I read this year. And I believe I only read two. So I read the entirety of and finished The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins, and I also read and finished the entirety of the Ancestor trilogy by Mark Lawrence. And honestly, both of these really good in their own right. I feel like these were both two really good, strong series that I enjoyed. I remember more about The Hunger Games because I read it most recently, and I remember being very impressed for a YA just how good it was for like a young adult book. And the Ancestor trilogy was like the very first thing that I read at the start of January. It was like my first book of the year, my first series of the year, so it was a while ago. But I think on balance, looking between the two, I am giving my award for best series finale that I read this year to Holy Sister by Mark Lawrence. It's not the best book I read this year, but this was, I think, a really good resolution to the series. I feel like it left us with enough questions that it's very easy to want to know more about this world, and I know Mark Lawrence has done another book like in this sort of universe setting, which I have not read yet, but I think this was a good conclusion to Nona's story and the sort of plot that we'd been following. I think it had high enough stakes without being ridiculous, and I don't think the resolution was disappointing or out of tone in any way. I think it was pretty good, and I don't want to talk about the nuns, but the nuns, the school teachers, that whole sort of like last section of the book, I really did enjoy. And it's hard for me to remember everything that I would have maybe liked to say about this book if it were more fresh in my mind. Yeah, I think with The Hunger Games, my issue was that the first book was my favourite and I thought the third book was the weakest, whereas with this, I think I enjoyed it more than the first book, and it's rare that I can binge a series all the way through, so this just kind of deserved to be the best series of the year. Yeah, okay, so now we get to the two last awards, and obviously the next one is my worst book of the year. And this was a book I read a while ago, but considering I haven't really read very much this year, it might not be a surprise to know that the worst book that I read in 2020 was The Fate of the Fallen by Kel Cade. This book was so disappointing in so many ways, both because of how much I'd hyped it up, but also just as an attempt at a book in general. It was just bad. I think I gave this a 1.5 stars, and that would have been a 1, which is the lowest I can give. The 0.5 was for like the kind of concept of having foresters and the way that the world sort of like works and reveres these people who keep the sort of trees planted, and like this cycle of cutting down and planting trees. I thought that was a nice part of the world that I haven't really seen very much before, in having like these foresters that are revered for doing what they do. So that was where that 0.5 stars came from. Everything else about the book was total trash. I don't like being mean with authors' books because I feel like I am really mean. But also, I paid for it and I sat through it and I read the whole thing and gave it my full attention, and I hated it. So I feel like I get to talk shit about it. I feel like I've earned the right to badmouth the book if I think it's crap. You don't get half measures from me. I'll tell you exactly how I feel. And how I felt about this book was that it was just awful. I kind of had high hopes going into it because, again, the premise sounded promising. Part of the synopsis on the back of the book mentions that what the book will be is like a twist on the chosen one trope, where it's like, what would you do if you can't rely on this chosen one trope, if it's just like left to the regular people to attempt to save the world, even though it's prophesied that it has to be like the chosen one trope. So that was sort of what the book was promising. Basically, to sum up, my issues with this book include that the characters are very flat and one-dimensional and like one note. The plot, I think, is also the worst thing about this book. The main character, Aslow's plotline is there's the call to action. He has to get from point A to point B for a certain reason, and once he gets to point B, you're like a quarter of the way through the book, and I've likened it to when Frodo gets to Rivendell. It's like, okay, he's completed his call to action, but now there needs to be something else which keeps driving the story forward, and there isn't. The whole rest of the story is him just wandering around various places for no reason, meeting various people in interactions that don't add anything to the story, and he will constantly encounter like an obstacle, like danger or something, and he will have no way to overcome the danger, but then at the very second that, you know, it all seems lost, he will suddenly find something or be given something, a power, an item, whatever, that means that he now can overcome this thing and save the day. And then a little bit later down the road there'll be like another issue and it'll be like, oh my god, this is so weird, there's no way you can possibly overcome this, because we've never been given any sort of build up to this thing happening. They're just random encounters, like on a fantasy map in a video game, they're just random encounters. And then again, right when there's tension, it's immediately just, here you go, here's the answer to your question, use this thing that you've never seen before, no one's talked about it before, this power, ability, item, skill, whatever, it's never been mentioned before, but here it is. And another character is like, I see you need to get over this problem, here you go, here it is. It was awful. It was atrocious. What the hell? It was bad. It was bad. It was bad. It was bad. That's not how you write a story. You can't have random new magical MacGuffins every single time. Like, the characters came out of nowhere. The obstacles came out of nowhere. The resolutions came out of nowhere. I'm like, what is the point? What is actually the point? Like, it really sucked. I think it does deserve a 1 star, and I think I am being generous giving it that 0.5 just for the concept of foresters. But I like me some nature themes in books, so I've been generous. I've got to move on. I've got to move on from the rant. I need to get it off my chest and just do a rant review of that book, because it was so bad, and I don't know anybody else that's done like a review. I've not heard anybody else's review, full stop, of this book. I need to do a rant review of that book, just to get it out of my system. Because every time I try and talk about this book, I talk for hours, and I need to just say, look, go watch this and then come back, because I can't keep doing this. I can't. It was atrocious. I can't. Okay, moving on to brighter things, better things, exciting things, you know, good things. Leaving the crap vibes behind, much like I'm leaving 2020 behind, and let's talk about the best book that I read in 2020. And I did have to think about this because I really did like Shadow Saint. I feel like it was a really good book, but I didn't like it as much as the first book. And honestly, I also think that All Systems Red was really good. I just think it was too short to really have that much of an impact on me. But I feel like, beating everything out just a little bit, the best book that I read in 2020 was The Wolf by Leo Carew. Nearly 5 stars for me. Something about it wasn't quite a 5 stars for me. The sort of basic premise is that in the north you have this race of like warrior people called the Anakim, you know. They're really big, they're really strong, they're very much like a warrior race. They take a lot of pride in their like different like warrior factions and things. And then in the south you have like regular humans, and there is a random upstart among the southerners who decides that he is going to convince the king essentially to go to war with the Anakim and claim the north as their own. Basically genocide, destroy the other race, because they're thought of as weird monsters, just uncivilized. And so the whole thing is about this constant fighting between these two sides, and it's a very simple premise, but I feel like the way that it's done in this book is done really well. There's a lot of very important like interpersonal politics within this book, especially in the Anakim society. You really have to learn a lot of like their ways and how they do things and how they operate, and the main character Roper, who is like the newly crowned king essentially of his people, is kind of finding out like it's not enough to just rule the people, you have to do things in a very specific way. In a lot of politicking, basically, you can bring people onto your side, the way that you can make friends, make enemies by making friends, or make friends by making enemies. It's the politics in this, if you like stuff like the Game of Thrones type politics, where you have different factions, but you have like lots of little different sides within those groups of people, then I think you might really like this. And especially if you just like any sort of like big military battle sequences, a lot of like fighting and warfare and medieval style warfare, again, this book really for you. I really enjoyed this one. When I read it, something about it just pulled me in like right from the start, and I was just really enjoying reading about like miserable, dreary Britain-like setting, this horrible place to be. It's kind of grounded in a lot of realism, and I believe the author is, I think he's an anthropologist. Yeah, he's a biological anthropologist. So I feel like you can see that a lot in his work. A lot of it is grounded in the culture of the people, and I feel like it's a new twist, a new aspect where he focuses on this so much more, and it just gives it like this little unique flavour that makes it seem very realistic. It's still fantastical, but in a very realistic way. So yeah, this is my best book of 2020. I think it definitely was the best book that I read that year. It was just so entertaining. Like, it's not too big, but I flew through this book, and yeah, I just really enjoyed reading this one, and I can't believe I haven't gone on to the sequel yet, but I'm hoping to do that this year in 2021. So yeah, best book of the year. Woo! So yeah, that was like my little rundown of all the books that I read in 2020. I guess like this is my entire wrap up of the whole year, hoping that 2021 will be a better one all around, not just reading wise, but definitely also reading wise. Unlike last year, I'm not really setting myself many goals for the year going forward, so come the wrap up next year, I'm hoping to have read more books, read a little bit more widely, but just read what I want, when I want, and yeah, the hope is that come this time next year, when I'm doing my 2021 like wrap up year in review, whatever you want to call it, this should hopefully be a much longer list and a much bigger list of like book awards. But yeah, that's about it for me. I'm glad to leave the year behind, move on to the next one. So yeah, with that said, thank you guys for watching. I hope you liked this video. I hope you liked my little wrap up, and that maybe you found either some books to add to your TBR, maybe some other books to avoid. I really hope everyone is having a fantastic start to 2021, and with that said, I will hopefully see you guys in the next video. Bye!